You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." These most unwelcome words come pouring from the courtyard. A servant girl of the high priest recognizes Peter from the garden earlier that night. Peter's response reminds us of the great exploits of the tongue, of the poison that proceeds from our lips never to return empty. Words that, no matter how hard we tug, we cannot reel them back into the hidden recesses of our hearts and our minds. "I don't know what you're talking about," Peter replies. But the servant girl, upon further inspection, she knows. That man is one of them. 3 days after the rooster crows, a group of women approach the tomb of Jesus to anoint him with spices. But the stone has been rolled away, and they're greeted by an angelic figure who delivers the most unexpected news along with the commission. Jesus, the crucified one, is not here. He has been raised. Go, tell the disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. And Peter? Why is he singled out? Doesn't Jesus remember the whole betrayal thing? Why not James or John? How about Andrew? Heck, why is anyone singled out here? Well, the gospel is social and political and all that, but there's also a personal dimension to it. And Jesus has two personal questions for the Peters of the world. First, are you going to be part of this journey? And second, are you going to be part of this journey? In 1962, the famous marine biologist Rachel Carson wrote her groundbreaking book on the adverse effects of pesticides on the environment. Titled Silent Spring, the book warned that these chemicals would have a catastrophic impact on the bird population, leading to springs deprived of the sound of birdsong. Can you imagine? According to Carson, one of the jobs of wildlife conservationists is to make people notice what isn't there, what's missing, what's absent, what once was there but isn't any longer. When it comes to hearing, the point is to make us listen to the silence. Have the house sparrows stopped congregating? Are the killdeers killdeeing less often than they once did before? Don't the northern mockingbirds seem awfully quiet this year? Silence really can be deafening, can't it? A few years ago, Abby and I were milling around the kitchen while Paisley and Adeline were playing in their bedroom when suddenly we stopped to listen. "Do you hear that?" I said. "No," Abby replied with a tinge of panic. "I don't hear a thing." Or as the movie trope goes, it's quiet. Too quiet. As parents of young children know, the sound of silence is also the sound of secrecy and mischief, of pesky shenanigans, or innocent but inconvenient silliness. We knew the girls were no longer in their room, but their absence indicated that they were present elsewhere. And sure enough, as we rounded the corner into our newly furnished living room, there they were with markers in hand, marveling at the once white walls that have now become a canvas of their most colorful masterpiece. You see, silence, absence, can take on a presence of its own. That's true of bird songs, and it's true of toddlers. But it's also true of the Easter tomb. Most New Testament scholars agree that the earliest version of Mark's gospel ends with tonight's passage, which would mean that Mark did not include an account of the risen Lord's appearance to his disciples. This was apparently a source of embarrassment for some early Christians, so an editor came along and added a few verses about the resurrection appearances, which now show up in our Bibles. But the original version seems to end more abruptly, almost as if it doesn't end at all. You have an empty tomb, some scared women, a commission, and then the curtain closes. Where is Jesus? Has anyone touched him like Thomas? Has anyone seen him hitchhiking to Galilee? Is the angel's testimony sufficient? These are questions that go unanswered, and we're left with just an empty tomb. But that's not nothing. Absence can take on a presence of its own, you know. Like conservationists, the angel encourages the women to notice what isn't there in order to imagine what might be present elsewhere. And being a mother, Mary probably knows that this absence, this sound of silence, is also the sound of holy mischief. Jesus is on the move. This tension between absence and presence is reinforced by the early hour at which the women visit the tomb. If you attended the sunrise service last week, you'll remember that at such an early hour, the light on the horizon barely starts to kiss the darkness as dawn begins to break. Likewise, when the women arrive to anoint Jesus, night is beginning to recede as the sunlight presses against the darkness. Absence, presence, darkness, light. Now, not yet. This is empty tomb theology, my friends, not a theology of total glory, not yet. And there's a reason why Mark concludes his gospel on that note. If you go all the way back to the very first verse in Mark's gospel, you'll notice that it says this: the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It's a peculiar way to open a gospel. Mark doesn't write a summation of the good news. He doesn't exhaust all the details of the Lord's identity. He doesn't even claim to record the majority of the gospel. No, this is merely the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. Kind of like Genesis, a book of beginnings. You see, the beginning of the good news ends on Easter morning. But Easter morning is not the end of the gospel. By leaving the story open-ended, Mark invites us to imagine how the gospel continues its march into the world. His account is merely the beginning of the gospel. And when the women flee from the tomb in fear and amazement, an ellipsis is practically placed on the end, 3 dots on the end, as though to say, to be continued. So the question is offered to us: will we be part of this resurrection journey? Will we pick up where things left off? If so, we must understand that things left off in the middle, not the end. The point of the resurrection is not to overrealize what has been accomplished. It doesn't take much effort to notice that the kingdom has not unfolded in its totality yet. The resurrection does not allow us to triumph in complacency. No, this is still empty tomb space, where the morning sun converges with the darkness of night, where presence meets absence, where the now confronts the not yet, where resurrection bumps up against crucifixion. We live in this kind of threshold space between 2 rooms, a space that is neither fully one room or another. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the great theologian, called it the anxious middle. But thanks be to God, we know we're in the middle only because we've glimpsed the end. We know ourselves as creatures of the middle only because our beginnings and our endings have been given to us in the person of Jesus Christ. Our location in this story is relative to the Word who was with God in the beginning, and the Lord who has died, is risen, and will come again. And this is precisely what Jesus wants Peter to understand. Following Jesus is hard, isn't it? We get tired. We get discouraged. We become demoralized. Doubts pile up until they drown out all that was once certain. We fall asleep when we should stay awake. We flee when we should stay. We deny Jesus more than once or twice. There have been times along this journey when I've lost my way. Maybe that's true for you too. Maybe that's where you are tonight. You're drowning in the mistakes of your past. Shame and addiction are dictating your sense of worth. You've fallen short of your parents' dreams for you, and you feel nothing but failure. You're estranged from your children are estranged from you. You have a tendency toward violence. You were silent when you should have spoken. You were a coward when you should have been brave. You were irreverent when you should have recognized the sacred. You betrayed the Lord when you should have confessed your faith. With Peter, you find yourself in the anxious middle. And now, even now, will Jesus let you stand with him? Go, said the angel to the women apostles. Tell the disciples and Peter that Jesus is going ahead of you. In the original language, the phrase is actually like a double entendre. On the one hand, the angel says, tell the disciples and even Peter. And on the other hand, the angel says, tell the disciples and especially Peter. Yes, even Peter. Even you. Especially you. We still live in this threshold space where the old age and the age to come bump up against each other. The resurrection is hidden and it's revealed in the crosses that we bear daily. So Mark leaves open the end in order to ask, are you going to be part of this journey? This one? Are you sure? Because it demands an awful lot. At the same time, living in this empty tomb space means that we're still going to mess up every now and then. But even in this space, in the anxious middle, we're held in the life of the one who did not fail. And he goes ahead of us into Galilee. So another question is posed to us. Are you going to be part of this journey? Even you? Yeah, especially you. Amen.